So good morning, everyone. I am delighted to welcome you along and share with you 7 critical mistakes with task analysis and how you can avoid them. So the running order for today, I'll introduce our expert speakers, and then we'll have a brief Q&A where we can discuss each of those critical mistakes in turn. Then we'll show you a little bit about our software and how that can help you avoid those critical mistakes. And then we'll wrap up with a Q&A session where we'll answer any questions that you have. On your screen, there's a Q&A section that you can press and just enter questions directly as we go. Or you can submit them to Laura directly in the chat. And Laura will put those all together and pass them on to us. So, joining us today, we've got Andy Brazier from AB Risk and Lorraine Braben from Braben Consultants. Both of these people are human factors specialists with many, many years of experience in both the wider field of human factors and specifically in task analysis. They're both currently part of a panel who are contributing to the development of new guidance relating to human reliability analysis. I feel incredibly fortunate to have them both here with us, and I know what they're about to share will be of tremendous value to all of you. Just so that you know who I am, my name is David Jamieson, and I'm the founder of Salus Technical. Our goal is simply to make process safety straightforward, and we provide process safety consultancy as well as 2 software products. The first is Bowtie Master, and of course, we've recently launched task analysis software, which allows you to quickly and efficiently complete task analysis workshops in the cloud. Before we dive in, it's worth a sort of point or two on task analysis itself. It's obviously incredibly important and crucial to understanding the role that human error can play in accidents. But despite this, we continue to struggle as an industry to implement them effectively. For example, in one industry in the UK regulator has recently taken enforcement action following inspections on sites and offshore for matters such as not having a clear process for task analysis, for completing task analysis at the wrong time, for not implementing it effectively, or indeed a lack of general human factors awareness for the people who are involved. So the final slide before we dive into the questions is here is a quick summary of these critical mistakes. And we'll go through each of these now in turn. So I'll kill the slides and I'll welcome the panel. So it's at this point, just stop presenting, that I'm delighted to welcome Andy and Lorraine. So hello to both of you. Welcome along. And we'll get straight into the questions. So first up with Lorraine. So a lot of cost, time and effort goes into task analysis. What are the benefits that we get out of it, and how can we gauge in advance how much effort that we should put in?
Okay, thanks, Dave. So I think often you're right that people see task analysis as a burden rather than a tool for improvement. But if you look at it as a way of finding out more about what actually people do, you'll start to see some of those benefits. So as well as dealing with the safety aspects of a task, you can also use task analysis to improve things like quality, reliability, productivity, anything that's a focus area for your particular business that task is associated with. And I think by doing that detailed task analysis, it allows you to understand that human interaction with the system. So as you've just said on your slide, people and engineers design solutions, but people don't often know how to interact with it. The task analysis process can understand what people actually do in terms of that interaction rather than the assumptions, and then allows you that chance to improve and actually re-educate if that is what comes out of the analysis. I also think that the task analysis helps us to understand and improve our downstream processes better as well, so such as developing procedures. Normally, if you do a task analysis, you'll find that there's improvements required on those procedures in terms of competence management, make them all relevant to the task, as well as the potential for actually improving some of those engineered safeguards as well. So,
excellent, thanks. And on a similar note, Andy, have you seen examples where we can go too far with task analysis and include too many details?
Yeah, I think that's a temptation, a challenge that we always have. I think maybe it's partly because we're all techie type people and we know the devil's in the detail, so we go straight to the detail. And it's often how we set off. So, we'll say, how do we do this task, right? The first thing we have to do is go and open that valve. And then once you've started at that level of detail on step one, you feel you have to write every little valve movement, even to the point where, and it's important that valve opens. So we'll send someone to check that it's open. So then we end up with almost twice as many steps because we're doing something and we're checking it. Now, the key point is sometimes that's really important, and so, yes, if it's a valve that's particularly critical, that's open, given an open signal from the control room, but it's really critical it opens, yes, we will send someone to check it. So the problem with putting too much detail in is that those subtleties, those where it's really important can get lost. So I know that's why our task analysis approach is hierarchical. We start with what are the main activities that we're setting out to achieve, not what's the first valve we have to go and open. So it's that hierarchical approach is what the task analysis method gives us, and what the software can help us with as well. And it's making sure we have the right details, and there is a judgment call to be made, as always. And as like Lorraine's already said, it does depend on what you want to get out of it as well. So often what I'm doing is process safety. So we need to make sure that we are focusing where the process safety issues are, and clearly if we get bogged down on other aspects of the task, the danger is we'll either miss the process safety bit completely, or it will get lost in the melee. And as far as sort of a guideline of what's the right level of detail to go to, I always say you can think of somebody, a competent person coming from another location. Would they understand that task description? So it's not necessarily me or any of us in the room or the man or woman in the street. It's that person who already has the basic level of understanding. So not only would they understand the task, but would they also recognise where the hazards are and what the risk controls are that we've got in place?
Excellent. Yeah, no, good, great. So let's flip to the exact opposite side then. I know that sometimes when we perform task analysis workshops, we can miss important details. So Lorraine, do you have any examples of this? And what's the significance, of going too far the other way and missing some important details?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it really reflects very much what Andy was just saying is, as engineers and technical people, we like to get into the details, but I think we often miss the bits about what the human interaction actually is with that process. So, for example, a typical miss is, what I call the what ifs. So, if you're asked to check a pressure reading, you might get check that the reading is between X and Y, but what if it isn't? What do you do then? So often those are typical things that get missed, and the sort of things where what might prompt you to stop the task and drop out of the task at a particular point. I think as you go through the discussion of the task in terms of developing the task analysis itself, often there are points that come out at that point that will need to be picked up later, that will need to be put in to the analysis in order to do the human error analysis part of it. And if you don't structure your task analysis chart in the first place in the correct way, then you miss a structure that allows you to really get into that part of the discussion from a human error piece. So I think that is one of the critical parts when you're structuring it that gets missed. The other thing that I see is people don't challenge the procedure. It's almost like the procedure is gospel, and because it's on paper or in electronic format, that is what people do, and we know that isn't necessarily what people do. A really good example of that I encountered a while ago was I was doing a task analysis on checking gas detectors, and the gas detectors were there to identify release of gas and to initiate water sprays in that area. And it almost felt like the way in which the procedure had been written and the way in which the maintenance team actually checked those gas detectors was as though there wasn't a process plant connected to those wires. It was literally, they initiated the gas detectors through a simulated signal, they pulled knife edges in the I/O panel, and they checked that a light came on. And that was as far as the check went on. And trying to find out whether there was a separate task in where they actually checked the water sprays was difficult. And so actually thinking of the task end to end was what was required there, even though potentially it covered more than one discipline. And so I think sometimes we miss what is actually quite obvious, and having a new pair of eyes come in and look at it can be a real benefit.
Yep, no, that's excellent insight there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Andy, let's say that we've completed a task analysis workshop, we've executed it perfectly. What happens next? You know, how do we get the most out of implementing, you know, the output of a task analysis? Who do we involve, and how do we implement what we've done?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been doing this for 25 odd years, and you know, I'm sure some of the time it's just been a tick box exercise. We need to do a task analysis because the regulator says we had to, or someone at head office said it was a good idea, and that's happened, and that can be easy money for me because no one's really very interested in the results that we come up with. But you know, no, realistically, that's a waste of everybody's time. But even when the best intentions have been in place, you know, there's a lot of things that people are having to deal with. You know, we do lots of different types of safety study. But, you know, I think we have demonstrated over the years that used in the right place, done properly, a task analysis is a really useful tool. It's a really useful output. But you're right, getting it available to the right people who can make a difference is really important. Now, Lorraine's already alluded to procedures. Yeah, one thing that will inevitably come out of this is you should be reviewing your procedures. You know, you've gone to this effort. The task analysis is giving you a good explanation or description of how a task is being performed, or maybe should be performed. So clearly it makes sense to review and update procedures to be in line with the task analysis. So that's an immediate. I mean, I write that pretty much as an action right at the start. You will have to review a procedure at the back of this. I mean, hand in hand with that is training and competence, and this is, I think you're right, Dave, about we do a task analysis in, where are we now, November. I'll deliver my report in December. We'll do a training course in January. Tick in the box. That's great for our existing workforce, but how do we make sure that training is then carried on to others? So you're right. So who's looking after your competency management system? We need to be engaging with those people as well to make sure that it's not just the short-term gains, that it actually becomes the findings that, you know, it's quite expensive to get to this point. So let's make sure we're maximising the benefit. And those are the relatively simple things to do, and yeah, I think we're reasonably good at doing that these days. But we should always be looking at the hierarchy of risk controls. Of course, we should. Now, unless we're doing this at the very start of a project, our opportunity to eliminate hazard is quite minimal. We have to let's be realistic, or to put passive engineered barriers in place. But it doesn't mean it's not possible. What I would say, though, is what it gives us an insight. So we might not be able to eliminate the hazard, but maybe while we're doing that particular task, could we reduce the hazard a little bit? You know, and that's worth doing. So if you're doing something at 100 bar pressure, well, while we're doing this task, can we just drop it down to 90 or 80 bar? You know, it's not a massive change. It's not eliminated the hazard, and it would be hard to pick out exactly what the benefit would be, but it's got to be of some benefit. And I think it's also useful to always reflect on the hierarchy of control anyway, is to say, well, this has given an insight. How close are we to the inherently safe solution? You know, maybe it's not inherently safe, but it's actually quite close to it. And maybe we can be a little bit less concerned about those areas than where we say, well, we thought we were quite good because we've got these, we've got a safety instrumented system. But actually, when you look back at the inherently safe solution, if we had it, we're miles from that. And so actually, we're less reassured by our safety instrumented system. So yeah, it's all that good stuff. Ideally we're doing task analysis right at the beginning of a project, and we do have to have the chance to influence everything. And some of these things, we might not be able to implement an immediate action, but maybe with other information as well, and maybe other project work coming along, you want to be able to earmark that and say, well, we've learned something from this task analysis that we've got other opportunities to reduce the risks as we're going on. So yeah, who do you involve? Everybody potentially, but it's not just procedures and competency. Let's talk to the process safety. Let's talk to the process engineers. Let's talk to the instrument and control people about, because they've all got good ideas as well, and they it's better they understand how their solutions are being used. The better, either they maybe they can't even fix this one, but when they come to build another one in the future, maybe they can build that one better.
No, that's great. Yeah, what more can we do to reduce risk, and why aren't we doing it? Yeah, it's a great point. Just for anyone who joined us slightly late, there is a Q&A section where you can enter your questions or send them to Laura directly. But so let's follow that chronological order a little then, Lorraine. So we have done a task analysis, we've implemented it, in a manner that we're fairly comfortable with. How frequently should we revisit a task analysis, or maybe to put that question another way, what are the triggers, to revisit? And have you seen any examples where this hasn't happened?
Yes, loads. I guess the key thing for me would be to say, like any management system, you should have a procedure that defines your frequency to revisit these things. And if you have that procedure, then you follow your procedure to revisit them according to that frequency. And within that definition, for different types of task, different levels of risk associated with this task, you may have different frequencies to come back and have a look at it. So in a very simplistic way, it's the question of do what you say you're going to do. However, you might choose to align that to your HAZOP frequency, so a lot of the tasks will have some, and should have a link to the major accident hazards, and they will be aligned with your HAZOPs. And clearly, for all process safety people, we know that you're on a cycle of reviewing and updating and revisiting your HAZOPs. So you might choose to align the revisitation of your task analysis on a similar frequency to the HAZOPs, because if you did it as a follow-on exercise after the HAZOP, you could go back and look and see whether anything has changed within the HAZOP that affects that task. So in terms of general management, that's how I think I would do it. You may also choose for infrequent tasks to only do the task analysis as part of the preparation for doing that task. So for example, some years ago we had a task came out of our HAZOPs as something that we would do. It came onto our task list, our safety critical task list, but it was very, very infrequent, like more than every 10 years. It was, it was a long time in between us doing that. So would it be appropriate to do a task analysis every 5 years for that task? I'm not sure, because it might be out of date anyway by the time that you do it, and it might have some very special circumstances associated with it at the time at which you do it. So, there is an assumption here that you have part of the planning time to do the task analysis, to collect the actions, to implement actions, but that might be another way of approaching the frequency of when you look at the task analysis. In between all of that, I would say you need a link from your management of change processes. So, and that would apply to both technical changes and organisational changes, because both of those can have an impact in the way in which the task may be done. may impact the performance influencing factors. If you think about an organisational restructure, is that going to affect sort of availability of personnel, competence, etc.? You know, a physical change on the plant might affect the way in which the human interacts with that particular task. So all of those things could affect the task analysis. But certainly I would expect any of your risk assessments associated with your management of change should be asking a question around whether your safety critical tasks are affected by the change and whether or not it requires a review of your safety critical task analysis, and get that embedded in your culture. So that is an expectation of change, that not only are you going to update standards or procedures or do some training, but actually it goes into task analysis. And my experience is that that takes some effort to get it embedded within your workforce, that is just part of the change management process.
Sure, yeah, and I think that's really important. I've seen lots of examples where there is no link between the MOC process and the task analysis process, and indeed feedback from the regulator where they say that your task analysis process isn't fully integrated into your management of major accident hazards, you know, and that would be an example of that. So yeah, no,
yeah,
that's great.
I think sometimes we see human factors almost as something that sits alongside our normal process safety management systems, and it needs to be absolutely integrated as being just one part, just a part of the whole.
Mm-hmm. So then on that exact same note about timing, then Andy, you know, I've seen feedback from the regulator regarding a workshop being done too early, so it was in a project phase. So then the actual status of the procedures at that point wasn't finalised. So essentially, this operator had a suite of procedures that had been subject to task analysis, but they didn't represent how they operated in practice. So how do we get that right, and how do we make sure that we're always using the most accurately available information?
Yeah, well, task analysis, and again, because of its hierarchical structure, I think can be very valuable in the project phases. You know, when you're at feed, front-end engineering, yeah, you don't have all the details, but we have a pretty good idea of how these tasks are going to be performed. So, you know, the high-level hierarchy is actually a really useful way of focusing your mind. And, you know, and the answer is you should develop the detail of the task analysis as the detail of the design is developed. Yeah, and I'm not aware of this case that you're talking to, Dave, and I would almost say, how can you design a plant if you don't know how it's going to be operated and how it's going to be maintained? Which we never do projects like that. We should do, but the procedures get written at the end, and it always seems to be the wrong time to be doing it. But at least with task analysis, and if we can focus on the most critical tasks, we can inform that. We can inform the designers who can make better choices. And yeah, I had some good successes. It's nice when you get to go back to projects and see that, well, actually we discussed this earlier in the process than we might have normally done, and you can see the evidence that it's actually had an impact. And yeah, especially nicely if you go and see it's being built and it does make sense. You know, you're always worried, is it going to make sense when I actually see it in real life? And you always pick up things as well. Oh, right, why didn't we think of that? Why didn't we do it differently? But you know, we'll over time we're getting there. I mean, once the procedure exists, yeah, there is this strange mentality sometimes that the procedures are right because we review them every 2 years or every 3 years. Well, I've said I've been in this game 25 odd years, and I'm happy to go on record that I've never yet found a procedure that was 100% correct. Even procedures that I've had a hand in writing, when we've come back to review them some time later, it's like, oh, who wrote this nonsense? And then you go, oh, well, it was probably me. I'd like to think not major howlers just finessing around either a specific detail, more about the wording, what we knew, what we were saying, what we meant at the time. When you read it again a couple of years later, saying, well, yeah, maybe it was open to a bit more interpretation. So that's a key message. You know, we're never going to get procedures 100% correct. As I say, having gone through that process, and you know, it's making sure the important things are clearly described is what procedures should be about. And again, back to the amount of detail. Fill it with a load of nonsense, you're just never really going to understand what needs to be written in the procedure, why you're writing the procedure in the first place. And you know, my view is, I always say it's there to support competent people. So it's not trying to cover everything, and it's also expecting part of competence is, situational awareness. So it's not just here, go and follow that. It's, well, you've got the competency to do this task. This is here to help you do that with reducing the likelihood of errors. I mean, I was at a control room the other day and I was going through this procedure with the operators and saying, why do you keep repeating these steps? And they said, well, we have to, because of the system, the way the system's set up, you have to keep going back through the sequence. And there happened to be an instrument engineer in there overhearing. He said, no, you don't. They said, yeah, we do. We've always had to. They said, no, we modified that a year ago. There's absolutely no need for you to be doing that anymore. And that message either hadn't got through because being shift workers, maybe the shift on the day had been told and hadn't passed that hadn't been passed on to everybody else, or maybe they just never really quite believed it, and it kept reverting back to type. So, but so having said, I've never found a procedure that was 100% correct. Certainly bear in mind, most procedures I get to review are reviewed on a regular basis, but people aren't looking at them with the level of detail, scrutiny. Typically, we haven't trained them to do that. We haven't told them exactly what we're expecting them to do, and I can, by going through the task analysis process, they start to get a much better focus on what's really important. And it also starts to highlight. So you maybe have process engineers who are writing procedures who don't have, take the offshore environment, especially currently, process engineers aren't getting to spend a lot of time out on the facility. They're not getting direct face-to-face access with the technicians, and they're working off a P&ID, and what makes sense off a drawing doesn't necessarily make sense when you're out there in the real world. So another procedure we were looking at the other day was talking about using a bypass valve to pressurize the system. Yeah, it was like, well, that valve's not open for 10 years, we're not going to get that open now, and oh, by the way, the pressures we work at these days, it's not really that big a deal. Why do we need use a pressurization valve that we know is going to be hard work when we can just use the main valve? So things like that, on the P&ID, it makes perfect sense to use the bypass. That's what it was intended for. But yeah, the reality, it wasn't possible, and it wasn't that big a deal. And it's certainly, a sort of a watchword for others who are, to be an intelligent customer in this market. Myself and Lorraine are offering ourselves as facilitators. When you get people who are saying, oh, well, we just take the procedure and we do the task analysis from the procedure, I think it's time to step away and look for somebody else to help you in that process. So yes, it's the procedure's never going to be 100% right. Our task analysis is never going to be 100% right, but the hierarchy, involving the people in a more active process to generate it, I'm confident that it's closer to sort of helping you understand what the risks are and how they're being managed.
Okay. Yeah, and that point there about our procedure being there to support competent people, yeah, that's exactly right, and that's a very good way of putting it. I'll be stealing that and using that myself in the future. Okay, so on to the final question then, and I'll ask it to you both. I'll go to Lorraine first, and then Andrew, you can come in, with anything else. So we all know how difficult it can be to coordinate from start to finish the whole task analysis process. That that the workshop's only one part, and a lot of people obviously need to be present at the workshop. But equally, if we don't have a team with suitable knowledge and experience, the session arguably is a waste of time. So who would you say are the right people to be involved in a task analysis workshop, or how can someone decide who are the right people to be involved?
Yeah, I think actually it doesn't need lots of people. I think it needs the right people, and sometimes that doesn't have to be very many. So that's something to be aware of. So I would tend to break it down into, you need the people who actually do the job. They would be the people who are expert in how the job actually gets done in practice, understanding, what goes on for them when they're trying to do it, the environment that they're working in, and so on. And then you need people who understand the technicalities around the job, both in terms of how it should be done to achieve the desired results, and also the process safety implications, assuming that we're looking at it from a coma, major accident hazard point of view. So in terms of the inputs, they're probably the two groups. They may be different people, there may be different disciplines as well. And if the job crosses different disciplines, so maybe it has an element of operations, an element of mechanical maintenance, and an element of instrument or electrical, then clearly they all need to have an input on that to a lesser or greater degree, dependent upon what they're required for the job. You need somebody, and I'm sure myself and Andy will back this up, you need somebody who understands human factors as a discipline, I think. I've certainly come across task analyses where people have looked at this and actually generally as a result of the HC action, and then the HC have gone, this isn't right, you've not done the right type of analysis with that human factors perspective. So it does need that. The other question mark for me is managers, and I think I have a bit of a watch out about including managers. I think managers can be great at the beginning to come in and say, you know, we are backing this, we want you to be honest and open and share everything that's wrong about what goes on as well as what's right, what helps, what hinders, share your mistakes. If you can get that at the beginning, that can be helpful. But actually having a manager in the room will depend very much upon the culture of the site and that particular part of the organisation, because they can hinder that open conversation. And I think our job as facilitators is to create a dynamic within the room and within the workshops that people are happy to share, you know, their mistakes potentially, because that's what we're going to learn from, and to be open about what works for them and what doesn't work for them. But it does depend. It depends on the managers, depends on the dynamics within the groups as well. So for me, it's those three key groups, you know, practical expertise, technical expertise, human factors expertise, and that may be across the more or less people.
Yep, no, that's great. And yeah, I completely agree with your point about management, you know, and when I was working in duty holders for sessions like this or HAZOPs, I would always ask the managers to come in at the start, set the scene, make the team feel empowered, but then get them to leave. And then, you know, yeah, excellent. Andy, have you got anything to add on top of that?
Yeah, it does depend, of course. I think the most important people are the people who do the job. For a new project, they don't exist, so it's getting people who have valid experience of similar jobs. And I would bear in mind, you know, in projects, we're reasonably successful at getting operator representatives onto project teams. We hardly ever have a maintenance representative on the project team. So who's actually putting forward the practical aspects? It does also depend on the mix. So, you know, often you'll need a task might involve a control room operator and a plant operator. Now, obviously, if you've got someone who works in both jobs, they can cover both sides of it quite effectively. And in other cases, where maybe the jobs are differentiated, or once you become a control room operator, you never go outside again. So they might have done it 5 years ago, but their knowledge is out of date. Clearly, then what could have been done by one person in some circumstances needs two people in others. I would certainly say also it can be very useful to have a mix of experience. So having the person who's done the job for 20 years, fantastic. They've seen it, done it, been there. Having someone who's only just newly qualified in that role, or is even learning, can be really valuable as well, because they're there, they ask questions, and they need to understand things in a bit more detail. So things that might be just glossed over because it's always been like that. Well, you know, the new person will ask different questions and highlight that things may be not as obvious as the person who's done it there for 20 years. The other one, Lorraine, around the facilitation as well, depends on who you've got available. You know, task analysis is in some ways not rocket science, but it's being able to apply a range of knowledge and experience to the process. So, you know, and it maybe if you've got a facilitator who's got a good human factors background, but maybe not a process safety background, of course, who you invite to the session might be different. So if you're doing this in-house, you might have someone who's less familiar with the sort of the human factors bit. So you might need to support them in a different way. One thing I would say though, and again it links in with software and the new way of working thanks to COVID-19, is that it's opened up a lot of opportunities, and in some cases we're doing task analyses better now because we've got people available, and we can who can dial in from different so we can get different people involved at different stages of the process. And actually I was just looking through the attendees list, and there's a familiar name there from we were looking at an offshore decommissioning activity, and I was facilitating it from my home office. We had people in the client's head office, people from the client from home. We had the barge operator working from their office in the Netherlands, and people on the barge as well dialing in. So we would have never have got those people all in the room together. But because we're now all able to use Teams like this, and we're all familiar with working that way, it has opened up some really great opportunities as well. And there's pros and cons of everything. Yes, face-to-face that does have its advantages, and we'd always expect some degree of site visit, plant, task walkthrough, but that can be done by others. That can be done by people who were there at the time. So it doesn't necessarily have to be someone shipped in, like me or Lorraine being shipped in to do that. It can be someone who's given direction to say, well, we need to go and walk through this now. We need to go and look at this. Yeah, I'd like to see it with my own eyes, but I know it's not always possible. So there's a fair degree of flexibility required. And you're right about managers, supervisors. I've been in some uncomfortable situations, but again, I think cultures have changed over the years. That I feel that's less of an issue. And then the strength of the facilitator as well. If you can tell the supervisor to shut up, and they will do, that's fine, isn't it? And I think it's not just me who said it, but Teams has democratized workshops a bit as well, because when everyone's dialing in, you're kind of all almost equal. So things have changed even in the last 2.5 years.
Excellent. Okay, let me just bring these slides back up. Was this going to work? And I'll just get to the right slide. So yeah, guys, that was fantastic. I knew what the questions were, and I was still writing things down. I think the point Andy said about the tone you set at the start carries through about, you go into, this applies in HAZOP as well, you go into such detail on the first subtask, and that sets you up for the whole day. So yeah, really using the hierarchy, task, subtask, approach. And Lorraine, what you said about procedure certainly rings true about we're going to all this cost, time and effort of doing a workshop, but yet the procedure seems to be carved in stone and no one's willing to make any form of change to it. So yeah, I've definitely seen both of those things happen. So just before we go on to the Q&A session, I've had I know that Laura sent me through a few questions. So we'll obviously be sending this information out, so there's no need for anyone to be writing anything down. Just a note on the software, so it's just one quick slide. There's a few of the points that Andy and Lorraine have just raised there. I think it's pertinent to show what our software can do. To help you complete the workshop with ease, we've set up a drag and drop approach for tasks and subtasks, so you can easily add those, you can easily reorder those, and we've got a split screen option between the table and the diagram. So what you're risk assessing in the table is synced with the diagram. So if you do make any changes to the tasks and subtasks, then those are reflected. And to help you comply with good practice, or indeed the governance of your own company, you can customize everything, the column headers, if they're drop downs, if they're free text, you can color code, so that the idea is you can meet recommended and good practice, but still, perform a good workshop. And indeed, we talked about, implementing task analysis. So again, to help you integrate with your organization, you can easily get information in and out, of Excel, and use it to quickly export to update your reports and your procedures. And finally, with collaboration, we mentioned there about a lot of things being done in Teams and lots of different users. So you can add as many users as you like. You can enable hyperlinks to other documents. You can upload attachments, or multiple people can collaborate on the same task analysis. So we'll send you out details after this webinar, but we offer a free trial for 2 weeks. So I would encourage anyone, on this webinar to check that out. So, and sorry, there's a summary there, but again, we'll be sending all that information out to webinar attendees. So the final item, questions for the panel. I've got a few here that have been sent through, so I'll just go out quick fire. So we've still got plenty of time, so there's 5 or 6 questions here. So first one, I'm just going to ask it, and either of you can pitch in then. So does the facilitator need to be independent of the organisation? I don't know if either of you want to come in on that one, and then we'll take turns thereafter.
In my opinion, they don't need to be independent of the organisation. I think there's plenty of organisations that have their own internal human factors, personnel who can effectively do that. I think the analysis benefits if it's somebody who's not familiar with the task, not necessarily in that part of the organisation, or can step away from it, because I think the closer you are to it, there's the temptation that you know it already. You know what the constraints are, you know how it's done, and that assumption will come into the thinking. So I don't think it needs to be outside the organisation, but I think you are better having it away from that part of the business.
Sure.
That helps.
Okay.
What are your thoughts, Andy?
Yeah, I'd say, it's if you're buying in something, you want to be an intelligent customer, understanding why you're using a consultant, and like Lorraine says, if someone internally can act in the same role, that's absolutely fine. If you're worried about perceptions, though, sometimes you are buying in a consultant to give you that validation. So yeah, it is very much about the circumstances as well that you find yourselves in. As far as other reasons to use consultants, I find just on the it's often easier just to get us than to make resources available internally, and certainly things like report writing. I picked up more than one job where people have had to go in internally and they've never quite get round to finishing things off. The reports never get issued. I don't get paid till I've issued a report, so yeah, it tends to have other benefits. So yeah, I think
no, I would agree. I think you can get a lot better, a lot more targeted questions if you've got someone with that independent eye. I would certainly say there's tremendous value there. So, okay, I'll take the next one. I'll maybe go to Andy first then this time. How do we decide which procedures should be subject to task analysis? It's a good question. Yeah,
it is a really good question, and I think it's generally fairly simple, but it's one that people have often wanted to skip over. Oh, we know what's important, we need to crack on. So we do have recognised methods of ranking tasks according to what we say criticality is. So it's where there's a hazard and where there's a human interaction. We have processes. So there's a scoring system. There was the old HSE OTO report that has a 5 criteria that you score each task against, and I was part of developing that back in 1999, and I still use that today, and it's been recognised in Energy Institute guidance. So in the process industry, we certainly have methods for doing that, but we've discussed it. Say you said yourself and Lorraine are on a panel at the moment looking at this, and we've said it probably doesn't really matter what method you use as long as you have some sort of method. So list the tasks, apply some criteria to decide is it hazardous? Does it have human interaction? And would there be potential for error?
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think the question was phrased as which procedures you would use. I would just pick up the point that procedures do not necessarily equal tasks. And I think you, as Andy described the process, it's all about the task, not necessarily the documentation associated with it. And so think when you're selecting tasks, think about the tasks that people are actually doing, rather than assuming that everything is captured within procedures, because I've certainly seen sites start with their list of procedures and there's the potential that they miss some critical tasks in that process. And I mean, fundamentally, as Andy says, there's a number of documents that will provide guidance on that. But the key thing within what the HC are looking for coma sites is that you can link your list of tasks back to the MAHs, the major accident hazard risks associated with your site.
So there's two more questions in from the webinar. So one is, who should be challenging a procedure? So I'm not sure, maybe if that means who should be in the workshop potentially. Maybe if is there anyone independent that we should have who's challenging the procedures that we've got, or are trying to prompt any updates to them?
I think this sort of comes back to when we were talking earlier about who needs to be in the room, because ultimately, this is part of setting up the workshops associated with task analysis, is allowing everybody to understand what their role is in that process. And I believe that it's everybody's job to challenge the status quo, because that's what we're there for. Now, clearly, certain people might have different perspectives on things, and maybe if you're a bit further away from the task, it's probably easier to challenge. I often think that as the chair or the facilitator, in some respects, our job is quite easy because we just ask lots of questions. We don't go in with the knowledge of the task. So our job is just to ask the right questions, which will allow people to explain why that task is the way it is. And I think to be an effective facilitator is sometimes encouraging that light bulb moment within the people who are very close to the task as to actually why it may not be as it is currently done or as currently described. But in answer to the question, I think everybody who's involved in it is there to challenge what is currently going on and validate what you have.
I agree. Yep. Okay. Final question then, before I'll do my close. So it's a question, I'll ask it to yourself, Annie. So it's on software and about the use of software and flexibility. So obviously the task analysis software that we've got, is incredibly flexible. But beyond that, the question's more around, your like use and your preference for software. This person said that they use Microsoft Office, and what have you found about some software packages and how they can maybe help you?
Well, I think the key point here is I'm a strong advocate for task analysis being in the block diagram hierarchical format, at least to start with. We do the human error analysis bit later in a tabular format, but whatever you're going to do should be, if I didn't have access to software that did that easily, I'd be going back to post-it notes on flip charts. I wouldn't just be diving to an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. I am a strong advocate of that block diagram approach, because it just allows people to see what's going on, allows the group to work together in an effective way. So I've been using your software, Dave, for a month or so, and I'm on Teams, particularly, it's working very well. But it's that block diagram bit that needs to be supported, whatever you choose to do. I don't think I don't think it's just a nice to have. I think it makes a big difference.
Yeah, no, and I would agree. And obviously, once you make the hierarchical diagram, you can of course export to Excel as well in our software. But that's great. So I'll just move to the very last slide. I just want to thank both of you for coming along. I certainly got a lot out of that, and I hope that a lot of the attendees did too. I'd say, so what happens now, so we'll email all attendees with a summary of the recommendations and a link of how you can get in touch with Andy and Lorraine, and a link to the 2-week free trial as well. But to find out more about Andy and Lorraine, you can visit their respective websites, abrex.co.uk and brabenconsulting.com. So I'll just finish with many thanks for attending. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll hopefully see you all soon. Thank you very much. Cheers. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.